Chapter 6, The Wedding That Never Happened. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and golden, too beautiful for what was about to happen. The estate was a vision of white roses, silk banners, and thousands of candles. Guests arrived in glittering gowns and sharp suits, the press swarming outside to capture every detail of the grandest wedding the country had seen in decades. Elena stood before the mirror in her bridal suite, still and silent. Her gown was exquisite, ivory lace, delicate and regal, hugging her figure perfectly. Her hair was swept up in soft curls, and her veil glimmered faintly as it caught the light. "You look," her mother started, then stopped, pressing a hand over her mouth, eyes wet. Elena offered a faint smile. "Like a bride," she finished for her. Her mother sniffled. "Like a queen," she corrected. But inside, Elena's chest was tight, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Why do I feel like something's wrong? Why does it feel like he's not coming?" Downstairs, Adrian's mother adjusted her son's boutonniere, frowning faintly at how distracted he seemed. "Adrian," she murmured. "You love her. Don't you?" He glanced down at her, startled. "I do," he said, but the words didn't sound convincing, not even to him. Before she could press further, a commotion outside caught everyone's attention. A woman, dressed in a hospital gown and draped in a blanket, stumbled into the driveway. Adrian froze when he saw her. Her face. That face. The face he'd seen only in his memories, the face of the girl he'd loved when he was 15. She collapsed, and instinctively, he ran to her, catching her just before she hit the ground. Her eyes fluttered open weakly. "Adrian?" His chest clenched so tightly it hurt. "I'm here," he breathed, gathering her up in his arms. "I'm here." Upstairs, Elena stood at the altar, her hands clasped, her lips pressed into a faint smile as cameras flashed. The music played. Guests turned expectantly toward the doors. But the doors never opened. Minutes ticked by. Then an hour. The murmur started, spreading like wildfire through the hall. "Where is he? This is humiliating. Did he change his mind?" Her father stormed out to find him, her mother quietly weeping into her handkerchief. But Elena stood still, her head held high, even as her stomach twisted itself into knots. Finally, Adrian's mother appeared, alone. She walked up to Elena slowly, her face pale, her jaw tight. And then, to everyone's shock, she slapped Adrian's nameplate off the altar and said, voice shaking, "I'm so sorry, Elena. He's not coming." Elena's throat went dry. She stared at her future mother-in-law, searching her eyes for some kind of explanation. "Why?" she whispered. Adrian's mother swallowed hard. "He found someone. Or he thinks he did. I raised my son better than this." She cut herself off, looking away. Elena's fingers unclenched slowly at her sides. The cameras clicked, capturing the moment her carefully crafted world shattered. He chose her. Even now. Even after everything. He still chose her over me. She straightened her back, ignoring the tears threatening to fall, and turned to leave. Hours later, she found him at the hospital, still seated at the bedside of the woman who looked like his first love. From the doorway, she watched as he brushed a strand of hair from the woman's forehead, his expression soft, full of longing she'd never seen directed at her. Her chest felt hollow, her breath shaky. When he finally noticed her, he stood. "Elena," he started. But she raised a hand. "Don't," she said quietly, her voice hoarse. He looked at her helplessly. "It's not what it looks like." "It's exactly what it looks like," she cut in. He clenched his fists. "I thought she was dead. And now? And now you've humiliated me." "Again," she said, her lips trembling despite her best effort to stay calm. He said nothing. Her hands fell to her sides. "Tell me," she whispered. "Are you breaking up with me?" He stared at her for a long time. But no words came. His silence was louder than any answer. She nodded faintly, forcing herself to keep her chin high even as tears blurred her vision. "Fine," she said softly. "Then we're done." She turned and walked to the elevator, each step heavier than the last. When the doors closed behind her, her knees nearly buckled, but she held herself upright, biting her lip hard enough to draw blood. "Never again," she vowed silently. "I will never forgive you. Not in this life." Chapter 7, The Spy, the Betrayal, and the Mountain Fall. Months passed. Elena vanished from the public eye. Rumors swirled, that she'd moved abroad, that she was engaged to a doctor, that she'd finally moved on. But she hadn't. Not really. At night, she still dreamed of that hospital room, of Adrian's hand brushing another woman's hair while she stood, invisible, in the doorway. By day, she poured herself into missions, taking on work that even her commander called reckless. But she couldn't stop. She wouldn't stop. It was on a chilly spring afternoon when she learned the truth. She was returning from a routine inspection at the military base when she passed the operations room, and froze. On the monitor, she saw a photo of Adrian's first love. But this time, there was a file next to it. Her real name was not what he thought. She was not a survivor. She was a spy, a plant from an enemy organization, sent to infiltrate the presidential family and destroy them from within. Elena's blood ran cold. All at once, it made sense. The timing. The way she'd appeared in front of his car that day. The way Adrian had disappeared into the hospital and never questioned anything. But the worst part wasn't just realizing the truth. It was realizing he hadn't seen it. He still doesn't know. And if he keeps protecting her, he'll lose everything. That night, she received an emergency call from her little brother at the base. He sounded frantic. "Elena," he whispered, his voice barely audible over static. They took her." "Who?" she demanded. "The president's sister. They took her. Said they'll trade her for." His voice cut out. Her chest tightened. "They'll trade her for me," she finished aloud, already moving toward the door. Hours later, she stood on a lonely mountain pass, the freezing wind whipping her hair around her face. Across from her stood the doctor her mother had once tried to set her up with, his gun pressed against the temple of Adrian's little sister, who was gagged and trembling. Well, he sneered, his grip tightening on the girl. "The great Elena Voss. We meet at last." "Let her go," Elena said coldly, her hands at her sides. "She's worth nothing compared to you," he replied, baring his teeth. "They want you. So here's the deal, you come to me, and I let her walk away." Elena's eyes darkened. "And if I refuse?" He cocked the gun. She didn't flinch. Instead, she took a single step forward. "Fine," she murmured. "You win." The little sister's eyes widened in horror, muffled sobs escaping behind the gag. But Elena's gaze never wavered. They met halfway. The doctor shoved the girl toward the edge of the pass, and Elena caught her just in time, pushing her behind. But before Elena could react, he lunged, grabbing her wrist, dragging her toward the edge. "You think you're untouchable?" he hissed. "They all fall, princess. Even you." Elena twisted in his grip, but his strength was fueled by rage, and he forced her closer to the cliff's edge. Below them, jagged rocks and darkness waited. Suddenly, he slipped. She seized the moment, shoving him back, but his hand shot out, grabbing her jacket. They both toppled. The fall was brutal. For a split second, she saw the sky above her, cold and merciless, and thought of Adrian. Of his hands. His smile. The way he'd whispered, "You haunt me." Then they hit the ledge. Pain exploded through her body as she rolled, the doctor tumbling beside her. When they stopped, she was gasping for air, bruised and bloodied, but alive. He groaned weakly, reaching for her, but his movements were sluggish now, his eyes glassy. Before he could speak, she crawled to him, pressed her palm against his forehead, and whispered something low in his ear. His gaze dulled as he slumped against the rock, and then she reached into her pocket, pulling out the small vial she'd hidden all these years. A hypnotic agent. She pressed it to her lips and let the cold sting of the liquid numb her tongue. His voice, the doctor's voice, was already starting to fade as he muttered, "Why?" Her reply was soft. "So I can forget you. So I can finally stop loving you." And then everything went dark. When Adrian arrived at the mountain hours later, led by frantic calls from his sister and his men, he found only her crumpled figure in the snow, her eyes closed, her pulse faint. And when he tried to shake her awake, calling her name, she didn't even stir. He pulled her into his arms, his chest tightening with something he didn't understand. "What did you do to yourself, Elena? What did I let happen to you?" In the shadows above, a sniper hidden in the rocks watched them both. And into his radio, he murmured, "The weapon has been neutralized." Chapter 8, The Blind Dates and the Pilot. The months that followed felt like walking through fog. For Elena, everything blurred, days and nights blending together, her memories fractured and faint. She woke in a hospital weeks later with no clear recollection of what had happened on the mountain. There was pain, yes, an ache deep in her chest that no doctor could diagnose, but when she tried to remember why, nothing came. And strangely, that was a relief. She told herself she'd start over. So she did. It started with her mother, ever the strategist, gently suggesting that she start meeting people again. "You've suffered enough, Elena," her mother murmured, smoothing her hair. "Don't waste your youth waiting for someone who won't come back. Look at you, beautiful, accomplished, admired. You deserve someone who chooses you." Elena had smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm not ready yet." But her mother insisted, and finally, Elena agreed. Her first blind date was at a rooftop restaurant. The man waiting for her was tall, charming, and kind, a young lawyer who spoke eloquently and complimented her smile. But even as he spoke, she found her gaze drifting to the horizon, where the city lights blurred in the distance. Somewhere out there, she imagined him, Adrian, watching her, though she knew that was impossible. But it wasn't. Because he was watching. Adrian sat alone in his car across the street that night, fingers gripping the steering wheel as he watched her laugh softly at something the lawyer said. Every movement of hers, the tilt of her head, the faint smile, the way she leaned back in her chair, stabbed at him. When she got up and shook the man's hand at the end of the night, he exhaled slowly, his jaw tight. The second blind date was worse. This time, it was a businessman, confident and funny, who brought her flowers and charmed the waitstaff. Adrian followed them discreetly, hidden among the crowd. When the man reached across the table to touch her hand, Adrian's chest tightened like a vice. He'd almost stood up then, almost marched over and ripped her away, but stopped himself at the last second. "You have no right anymore," he reminded himself bitterly. Then came the pilot. Her third blind date was a young fighter pilot, fresh from deployment. When Adrian arrived at the mountain hours later, led by frantic calls from his sister and his men, he found only her crumpled figure in the snow, her eyes closed, her pulse faint. And when he tried to shake her awake, calling her name, she didn't even stir. He pulled her into his arms, his chest tightening with something he didn't understand. "What did you do to yourself, Elena? What did I let happen to you?" In the shadows above, a sniper hidden in the rocks watched them both. And into his radio, he murmured, "The weapon has been neutralized." Chapter 8, The Blind Dates and the Pilot. The months that followed felt like walking through fog. For Elena, everything blurred, days and nights blending together, her memories fractured and faint. She woke in a hospital weeks later with no clear recollection of what had happened on the mountain. There was pain, yes, an ache deep in her chest that no doctor could diagnose, but when she tried to remember why, nothing came. And strangely, that was a relief. She told herself she'd start over. So she did. It started with her mother, ever the strategist, gently suggesting that she start meeting people again. You've suffered enough, Elena, her mother murmured, smoothing her hair. Don't waste your youth waiting for someone who won't come back. Look at you, beautiful, accomplished, admired. You deserve someone who chooses you. Elena had smiled faintly. Maybe I'm not ready yet. But her mother insisted, and finally, Elena agreed. Her first blind date was at a rooftop restaurant. The man waiting for her was tall, charming, and kind, a young lawyer who spoke eloquently and complimented her smile. But even as he spoke, she found her gaze drifting to the horizon, where the city lights blurred in the distance. Somewhere out there, she imagined him, Adrian, watching her, though she knew that was impossible. But it wasn't. Because he was watching. Adrian sat alone in his car across the street that night, fingers gripping the steering wheel as he watched her laugh softly at something the lawyer said. Every movement of hers, the tilt of her head, the faint smile, the way she leaned back in her chair, stabbed at him. When she got up and shook the man's hand at the end of the night, he exhaled slowly, his jaw tight. The second blind date was worse. This time, it was a businessman, confident and funny, who brought her flowers and charmed the waitstaff. Adrian followed them discreetly, hidden among the crowd. When the man reached across the table to touch her hand, Adrian's chest tightened like a vice. He'd almost stood up then, almost marched over and ripped her away, but stopped himself at the last second. You have no right anymore, he reminded himself bitterly. Then came the pilot. Her third blind date was a young fighter pilot, fresh from deployment. I made mistakes, he admitted. But I'm not done fighting for you. Chapter 9, Remembering Everything. It happened on a quiet, unremarkable night. Elena had just come home from yet another date with the pilot. He'd been sweet, offering to walk her to her door, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his eyes hopeful as he asked if she wanted to make this official. And she'd smiled. She'd even nodded. But deep down, she felt nothing but exhaustion. When the door finally closed behind her, she leaned against it, closing her eyes. Why does it still feel like I'm lying? Why can't I just forget? Her phone buzzed. It was from an unknown number. Envelope with arrow if you want the truth, come to Hangar 17. Tonight. Come alone. Her heart skipped. And before she could stop herself, she grabbed her jacket and keys. Hangar 17 was dark, cold, and cavernous, the sound of her boots echoing against the concrete floor. She stopped when she saw the figure waiting at the far end. A man. Familiar in all the wrong ways. The doctor. He was standing by an old file cabinet, flipping lazily through documents. When he saw her, he smirked. Well, he drawled, look who finally woke up. Her blood ran cold. You, she whispered. Ah, so you do remember something, he chuckled. Or maybe not. After all, you were quite cooperative when I hypnotized you. Her stomach twisted violently. What did you do to me? She demanded, her voice trembling with rage. He tilted his head, studying her like a cat toying with a mouse. Just erased a few inconvenient memories. You know, about the mountain, about him, about what really happened. Her hands balled into fists. But then he dropped the file at her feet, papers scattering everywhere. Go on, he said casually. Take a look. Let the genius soldier goddess see what she was too blind to see before. She crouched down, her fingers trembling as she gathered the papers, photographs, reports, transcripts. And piece by piece, it all came back. The mountain. Adrian's sister, crying as the doctor held a gun to her head. Elena trading herself to save her. The fall, the doctor dragging her over the edge. His voice whispering lies into her ear as he forced the vial of chemicals between her lips. And then Adrian, finding her broken body in the snow, holding her like she was the only thing keeping him alive. Her breath hitched as memory after memory crashed into her like a tidal wave. She staggered back, dropping the papers. The doctor watched her, amused. You always were his weakness, he sneered. And yet he still let you go. Her eyes snapped up, blazing now. No, she said, her voice low, dangerous. He tried to protect me. The doctor clucked his tongue. Pity he failed. Elena lunged before he could react, pinning him to the wall, her arm at his throat. You should have killed me when you had the chance, she hissed. He chuckled faintly, even as he choked. Oh, sweetheart, he gasped. Who says I still won't? But before he could move, the door to the hangar slammed open. And there he was. Adrian. His suit jacket was off, his shirt wrinkled, his tie loose, but his presence filled the room like thunder. Elena, he barked. Her grip on the doctor loosened just enough for him to slip away and vanish into the shadows. She turned, her chest heaving. Adrian stalked toward her, his jaw tight, his eyes blazing. You remember, he said, his voice low, but full of something that made her knees weak. She stared at him, speechless, her breath catching in her throat. You remember everything, he repeated, stepping closer. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Yes, she whispered finally. And just like that, the wall she'd spent months building around herself crumbled. Before she could stop herself, she pounded her fists against his chest, hot tears spilling down her cheeks. Why didn't you tell me, she demanded, her voice breaking. Why did you let me think you'd chosen her? That you betrayed me? That I wasn't enough? He caught her wrists gently, holding her hands against his chest. I thought I was protecting you, he said hoarsely. I thought if you forgot, you could be free. She shook her head furiously. I didn't want to be free. I wanted you. He flinched, his hands tightening around hers. I never stopped, he whispered, leaning his forehead against hers. Not for a second. Her breath hitched. And then, finally, she let herself believe him. For a long moment, they just stood there, in the middle of that cold, empty hangar, clinging to each other as though the world beyond no longer mattered. But somewhere deep inside her, she knew. This wasn't over. Not yet. Chapter 10, The Final Confrontation. The storm had been brewing for years. And now, it was time to end it. Adrian paced in his office, his eyes fixed on the map of connections and photographs pinned to the wall. At the center, the doctor's face, circled in red. Around him, names, organizations, traitors in the shadows. Elena leaned against the desk, her arms crossed, her expression calm but steely. They've underestimated you, she said flatly, meeting his gaze. And me. Adrian's lips curved faintly. They always have. She stepped closer, her finger tracing a line on the map. This facility here, she murmured, tapping a remote compound in the mountains. That's where they're keeping the records. The proof of everything, the infiltration, the money trail, the spies planted in your family's circle. Adrian nodded slowly. And the doctor? Elena's jaw tightened. He'll be there. Waiting. Hours later, the two of them stood side by side in the freezing wind outside the compound, clad in black tactical gear, weapons strapped to their backs. Adrian adjusted his earpiece and glanced at her. You ready? He asked softly. She smirked faintly, loading her rifle. Born ready.